how much water my yarn holds. So I like to squeeze it out, and you only have to do this once. So it holds about 500 mils, and it really depends how you're dyeing your colorway. If you're going to hand paint your colorway, then you're going to want to use exactly 500 mils. You want the yarn to hold all of the dye. Another way is by low immersion dye, and you're going to add more water and let the dye move around in your pan. So now we know how much water our yarn is going to suck up, and we've kind of determined how much water I want to add to the pan. And so my yarn has been soaking for about half an hour now, so it's ready to use. Know that when we put our yarn in the pan, we want 500 mils total water added to this pan. That is for one skein of yarn. If we were going to do one skein, we're going to add our 500 mils of water per skein, and that 500 mil of water needs to be divvied up between the colors that we're going to apply. So I'm going to apply 4 colors to my yarn, and so I need to divide 500 by 4. So now I'm going to calculate 500 mils of water divided by 4 sections of yarn is 125 mils per cup per dye color. So each color is going to have a total liquid of 125 mils. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 cups, each 125 mils for each color. Because I'm going to do 2, I'm going to go 125 times 2 skeins. That's 250 mils total liquid per dye color cup. Your yarn skein needs to fit in your pan, otherwise the dye kind of just moves around too much and it doesn't stay where you need it to stay. So you do not need a big pan like this. I have smaller pans that will fit 1 yarn skein, and it won't fit it in the long way, but it'll fit it in a different shape. And I could also put that pan in the oven. And so that's a nice idea. It's a nice way to hand paint yarn. And I'm going to lay my yarn skeins that are hung and draining in my pan, dry-ish, and then I'm going to pour all of the liquid dye on top of the yarn. If you have a soaking wet skein and you pour your dye in, then that dye is just going to move around. But if your skein is too dry, then it will repel the water. And so you don't want your yarn to also repel the water. Keeping a rule book, writing it down, and deciding, yes, this is how I want to drain it, this is how much water I want to put in my pan every time, and then you kind of create a system for yourself that works. So now I have my damp yarn and it's not too wet. Tobacco leaf, deep magenta. I have sunflower yellow, but you can't get it anymore. Because I have it and I want to use it up, I'm going to use that. If you want a replacement and you want to copy this colorway, then you can change it for brilliant yellow. And I'm also going to use Caribbean blue. And this colorway is also part of my newsletter, and it's a free PDF that you can get, and so you can print that PDF and put that in your binder, and so you'll have that colorway with the instructions on how to make that colorway in particular. And so you just print that off, and then you always have that go-to, and it's a visual, and so it's just a glance. You look at the numbers that you need, measure them out, and you just dye that colorway. So everything's there and it's ready to go. You do not need to do much math at all. So next you will need a microweight scale. You can measure your dye amounts from dye solutions. You could get a big huge jug, if you're dyeing a lot of yarn, colorways, or yarns in that color, and you can fill up that jug with your dye solution and just take your measurements from that. No need to weigh out your dye powder every single time. No need to add specific amounts. You would just measure it from your jug. In order to calculate how much dye you need a reference point. You're going to need to know what color you want to dye your yarn, what shade or intensity of that color you want. And different dye companies and different dyes are going to have different intensity. And look at it and say, yes, this is the shade I want for this colorway, and you're going to choose that dye amount that represents that shade based on the weight of the yarn. My recipes that I create, all the recipes are based on 100 grams of yarn, and today we're going to be dyeing 100 grams of yarn times 2. The point of this video is to make consistent colorways that you can redo over and over again. So I have my Caribbean blue, and I've decided that I want this to be quite a dark colorway, and so I'm going to go with 100 depth. I really like the depth of this color at 1 gram and 100 mils. 100 mils represents the solution if you were to make a solution. So if you're measuring your amounts from solutions, you would measure out 100 mils. Because we want to achieve this color, but we only want to achieve it on 25% of the yarn, that means we need to multiply 1 gram or 100 mils times 25% to get this color on 25% of our yarn. And so that's what we're going to do. So we've chosen that color. So here I have my deep magenta samples. I'm going to use my deep magenta 1 gram as well, or 100 mils. And I actually think I want to change it all to 2 grams to make the colorway punch. So I have decided for this colorway, I am going to go with the 200 mils or 2 grams. I'm going to dye my 100 grams of yarn, and I'm going to split up 4 colors across the yarn. And I've decided on the shade or the depth or the color amount that I want to apply to my yarn. But I need to divide that recipe into 4 sections. And in order to divide that into 4 sections, I'm going to go 2 grams divided by 4 equals 0.5 grams. And so I'm going to weigh out 0.5 grams of dye. I'm going to times 2, 1 gram of dye, because I'm going to dye 2 skeins. So now I'm going to pour 200 mils of water. It's meant to be 250 mils of water into my dye total, but I'm going to subtract 50 mils of water for the vinegar that I want to add later. So I'm only going to add 200 mils. And then I poured 200 mils of acid, which may be a little bit much.